Hey guys, it's Sarah, and today I bring to you my long-awaited September wrap-up. Actually, I don't know if you guys were waiting for it, but it's late and now it's here, so hope you enjoy. Let's just get into it. I read about 5 books in September, which I'm very proud of. I feel like I've been having a very good reading year. I think what's changed this year is that I've just accepted that audiobooks are the main way that I consume literature. I used to feel really bad when I didn't physically read, and I think that stems from being in the booktube community and seeing so many of my friends having the ability to read like 15 physical books every month, and I just don't have the attention span or the time to do that. I really like audiobooks because I can listen to them while I'm working as well as when I'm driving, and that consumes most of the hours of my day. Although I genuinely do love physically reading, when I get home from working 40 hours a week, laying up with a book isn't really my first priority. It's more hanging out with my roommates or hanging out with my boyfriend and not spending hours and hours and hours reading. And I also love reading books in one sitting, and if I were to do that, it would just ruin my sleep schedule and I would feel terrible all the time. The chance of me physically reading most of my books is just not a thing. I do have a few books that I am physically reading. I kind of pick them up here and there, but for the most part I've just accepted audiobooks. I know I might sound like I'm just trying to defend audiobooks. I don't know, there's some weird booktuber guilt when you're not physically reading. I don't know how to explain it, but it just makes me feel like not a real reader, even though I know that consuming an audiobook is reading. Emma Books actually did a super interesting discussion about this topic, so I'll link that video down below. I really enjoyed that video because it talks a lot about how reading audiobooks is valid and it is a form of reading, and that if you have a problem with that, it's kind of weird to shame other readers. And she actually shared a lot too about the brain and how it processes information, and it was just very, very interesting. So like I said, I'll link that down below. And I've spent too much time talking about audiobooks and trying to defend audiobooks and just rambling. So let's get into the books that I read in September. So the first book I read in September was Queen of the Tearling by Erika Johansen. This book follows 19-year-old Kelsey, who is the princess of a kingdom called the Tearling, and her whole life she's been raised in hiding after her mother dies because they want her to come of age so that she can reclaim the throne. Obviously she comes of age in the beginning of the book, and so people come to take her back to the kingdom. Little does she know there's a lot of corruption in the kingdom, and it's going to be a very hard job for her, and there's lots of people who want to kill her, and you know, general high politics, high fantasy, that sort of stuff happening in this book. I'm sorry that that synopsis really sucked. I just have tried so many times to describe it and you don't even know what take this is, so we're just gonna move on. It's a fantasy, okay? I'm not the biggest high fantasy fan. I think it's just because the books are so long and they kind of overwhelm me, and I'm worried that I won't understand the magic system, and I just think I'm a little afraid of them, so I tend not to read them. But I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I think a huge reason why I enjoyed it so much was because of Kelsey, the main character. She's kind of the typical YA heroine, badass kind of character. She comes in swinging, ready to stomp on misogyny and injustices and all those things that can kind of exist in fantasy worlds, and honestly our world too. The one thing that was very odd about this book is that we had characters named like Kelsey and Alyssa, but then we had characters named like Lazarus and Myrn, and very weird fantasy names, and I just thought that was really weird that you would mix those two things, having people with very normal names and then people with weird made-up names. I didn't get it. The next book I finished was In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. This book is basically about a bachelorette weekend gone wrong. The main character, Nora, hasn't talked to any of her school friends for over 10 years, and out of the blue she gets invited to her high school best friend's bachelorette weekend. That's a tongue twister. Anyway, she gets invited and decides, you know what, it's been long enough, I might as well go hang out with these people. The bachelorette weekend takes place in the middle of the woods, and there's a lot of secrets and lies and reasons why Nora hasn't talked to her friends in over 10 years and why she left high school very suddenly. I had a really great time reading this book, but I would say overall it wasn't the best. As far as thrillers go, it was really simple and the ending left a lot more to be desired. Even though the big reveal was pretty obvious, I found the book to be fairly gripping, and I really liked the writing, I really liked the characters. My only problem was that Nora had amnesia, and the story was told from the two different perspectives of the past and the present. And I find stories with characters with amnesia can be a little too convenient. Like, obviously we're not gonna know the full story until she gets her memory back, and I just didn't particularly enjoy that aspect. But like I said, overall the writing is good, and it's like a cute little thriller, if thrillers can be cute. Like, I'm pretty sure I'll read more Ruth Ware books, but I don't know if they're ever gonna be something to like write home about. The next book I read was a reread, and that was Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine. This is actually one of my all-time favorite books. For those of you who don't know, this is a middle grade about a young girl named Ella, and it is a Cinderella retelling. When Ella is born, a fairy curses her and forces her to have to obey any command that she is given. I'm sure many of you have seen the adaptation with Anne Hathaway in it, which I don't want to talk about because I feel that it is an abomination and should not be compared to this book in any way. Even though this book is meant for children, I absolutely love it to this day. I've reread it a few times as an adult, and there's something about Ella as a character. She's such a strong girl, and I feel like she never lets anyone walk all over her, even though she has this curse that forces her to listen to people. I read it first when I was 10, and I just feel like this is the kind of book that you want to give to your young daughter to read. And the next book I finished was The Night Circus by Erin Morganstern. This is a book that I feel like has been floating around on BookTube for a very long time, and actually 2 years ago Michael Bookline got me this for my birthday, and I just like hadn't read it, but then I heard Jim Dale narrated the audiobook, and I absolutely love Jim Dale because he also does the Harry Potter books, and he's just phenomenal. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I found it to be very atmospheric, and I really liked the characters. The one thing I had a problem with is that there's a lot of time jumps, and especially when you're listening to this on audio, it's extremely confusing. It was just really hard to follow because there would be times when something was happening, but then another scene would happen, and I'd be really confused because I'd be like, didn't that happen in this time, but this seems like this person is this age, and I was just very confused overall. Also, I should probably talk about what this book is about because I feel like no one ever does, and even I was kind of foggy on what I was getting myself into when I read it. Basically, it's about a magical circus, obviously the Night Circus, and at the center of it are two people who are basically magicians, and they are caught up in a duel, and the Night Circus is kind of like their dueling space. What's the word for that? Ring? Dueling ring? Battleground? I don't know the word. Let me know down below in the comments. Like I said, it's super atmospheric. Like when you're reading about the circus, you feel like you're there. It's very dense with description. I feel like some people don't like that, but I really enjoyed it. I felt like I could like smell the air and like taste the food, and like I said too, I really enjoyed the characters, although there were a few side characters that I actually liked more than the main characters. The main characters were like but there were a few side characters where I was like, yo, Erin, you should totally write a spin-off series about them. Also, just so you know, this is a very slow burn book, so if you don't like books that are really slow paced, this will not be for you. And it's more character based than it is plot based, so that's another thing to look out for. I personally like stuff like that, but I could totally see why someone else wouldn't. I just happened to be in that camp of people that I was like, not my favorite book in the world, but also had a pretty good time and would totally read more from this author. The next book I read was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I'm sure most of you have heard of this book, but basically it is a book centered around the Black Lives Matter movement. The story centers around a character named Star, who sort of lives between two very different worlds. She lives in a fairly poor neighborhood, but also goes to a predominantly white and very fancy prep school in a suburban area. At the beginning of the novel, Star goes to a party in her neighborhood and runs into a childhood friend named Khalil. At some point they leave the party, and while they're leaving, they are pulled over by the police, and basically a police officer ends up shooting Khalil in front of her. For some reason, going into this book, I didn't think it was going to be that hard to read, but immediately I was crying in this book. Like from start to finish, I cried multiple times while reading. This book is just so devastatingly real, and I just think everyone should read it. The social commentary and politics are spot on, and it does not hold back on the punches. Like, there are things that are very straightforward, like directly said by Star and by people around her just commenting on racism, but there's also so much subtlety and so many things that you can kind of pick up. Like, this is definitely a book that you'd want to reread multiple times. It's also a book that I think that should be in most classrooms and like in curriculums, and people just should be reading it. And it's just crazy to me that people don't think that this is a real issue. I will admit that the writing style is fairly plain. It's not very flowery, but I feel like a topic like Black Lives Matter doesn't really need that. It's a pretty straightforward issue that needs to be talked about. But that's pretty much it for my September wrap up. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope you missed my face and that you're happy to see it again. Thank you all so much for watching. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.